There aren't many 78-year-old women with a chimpanzee for a best friend, but then there aren't many women like Patricia Cavendish O'Neill. Kalu certainly seems to know this, but what she doesn't know is that a large inheritance is coming her way. When Patricia's gone, Kalu will become the matriarch of Broadlands. At 18, she's not a youngster anymore, and she very nearly didn't make it this far. She was found in the former Zaire, tied to a tree outside the abandoned home of the Argentinian Consul General. Through a trust, the farm Broadlands will be turned into a sanctuary. Patricia knows her time is coming to an end, and that's why she has made certain that Kalu and the rest of her family will always be safe.
In the trust, I've left the farm to the chimpanzee. Basically, it's called the Kalu Animal Trust. So it's for the chimpanzee and the baboons and for all the animals. And the only problem is the fact that I believe there are quite heavy death duties. And then the farm might have to be sold. So I'm trying to arrange that if this happens, that it can be re-established somewhere else. You know, so that's the only thing. So I'm just worried about dying at the moment till it's all settled.
At 78, Pat has lived an extraordinary life. Born of the British aristocracy, her mother a world-famous beauty. Living through years in Kenya when her best friend was a lioness. And then coming down to South Africa as breeder and trainer of champion racehorses. Patricia's mother had 4 husbands, and she broke men's hearts many times over. Her second husband, General Caviar Cavendish, was Pat's father. The dashing officer was the youngest general ever to serve in the British Army. But Patricia was raised by her stepfather, a shipping magnate by the name of Viscount Finesse. He was her mother's 3rd husband, and at the time one of the richest men in the world. Patricia and her younger brother lacked for nothing.
I had a professor who was an Oxford Don. All I did was history and geography and mythology. Those are the only subjects I did, really. So I was brought up in the most extraordinary, everything, you know, was there on the doorstep for you. My stepfather was terribly spoilt, and he would never go on any public transport, so he had his own trains. He had 2 ocean-going yachts with crews of 40, and then his own airplanes, and the airplanes were the best in the world.
Her mother and Viscount Finesse would spend up to 6 months a year on safari in Kenya. It was an unusual and privileged childhood, one in which Patricia developed a deep love of animals.
We were brought up, my brother and myself, to not know that there was such a thing as fear. Again, you see, it's been a big help in my life. And during the bombing in London, my mother had a house in Grosvenor Square. And when the bombers came over, we used to be rushed up to the balcony, and my brother and I used to get pocket money for whoever could count the most bombs coming out of the bay. We used to delight as soon as we heard the sirens going and the bombers coming over. We used to rush up to the balcony, you know, to see who could count the most bombs.
When she was 18, Patricia joined her mother to sail to Australia. Also on the ship was an Australian Olympic swimmer. It looked like a match made in heaven. His name was Frank O'Neill. Travelling back home with a group of friends, he came across the Cavendishes while taking a stroll around the deck.
I came down the staircase of the Orchidees, it was, with my mother and my brother. And he said he'd never seen anything like it in his life. And then he came up to me from the swimming pool. I was lying there sunbathing. And he said, I've had a bet with my friends. Will you let me win my bet that I can have you, that you'll come with me to dinner tonight? So that's how it started.
Less than a year later, they were married in the south of France, only to be divorced 4 years later. She was never good marriage material, as Pat herself quite happily acknowledges.
I never wanted to get married. I think this is the wild animal instinct. So I refused to get married in a church. I was the most horrible wife. I mean, you can't imagine.
If you look back over your life, what was the high point?
With my lion in Kenya. That was the most wonderful part of my life.
How long did you have her with you?
Oh, I had her about 11 years.
While the colonial elite were getting up to white mischief in Kenya, Patricia preferred the company of her lioness. Years later, by then twice divorced, Pat found herself in demand once again.
I got a letter from both my ex-husbands within 1 month of each other. Both asked me to marry them. How they wanted to, I cannot imagine. She was the most unsatisfactory wife, but still. because I'm always, surrounded by animals. And
It was 15 years after their divorce.
So why did you marry Frank again?
because he was the first one that asked me. No, but because he's a lovely person, he's an absolutely sweet person. And he puts up with all the animals and doesn't complain too much.
Frank might be an understanding man, but one of the few things he never could understand was why Carlo insisted on stealing his cigarettes and beer. In order to keep his citizenship, and, says Pat, his sanity, Frank spends half the year in Australia. And when he visits Broadlands, he often finds himself losing out to Carlo when it comes to sharing Patricia's bed for the night. But losing the bed is the least of it. Frank has lost the entire farm. The Australian press had a field day when they heard about Patricia's new will.
There was headlines, they're big, I think, in the major press, with a huge picture of me and the gent saying, Olympic husband disinherited for a chimpanzee. There were placards in the street of chimpanzee inherits. They made it into farm worth millions. Husband ousted.
But it's not just Carlo who will have the run of Broadlands when she is gone.
Well, I've got 32 baboons. I've neutered all the baboons so that they can't breed.
And all the dogs?
I feed 65 dogs. I've got 32 in the house. But they're all neutered as well. And then I've got 14 cats. And then I've got donkeys. I've got goats. I've got pigs. I've got some retired horses. And lots of birds. Lots of parrots and things like that.
What is an average day like?
Well, I get up at 5:15 every morning. Then I take them for a walk. And then I feed. And then I do the baboon things like that. And so it's endless, actually. Then I go to bed early.
Part of Patricia's success as a racehorse trainer lay in the close bond she has always felt with animals.
I used to play music to them if they wanted music. I used to take ponies with them if they wanted another pony as a companion. They were all very, very spoilt, and at the time nobody could believe what was going on here at Broadlands with the horses. But as I say, I trained 4 or 5 of the top fillies of South Africa.
Anyone who doubts Patricia's commitment to animals need only be reminded that this is a woman who once bought the entire stock of live crayfish at a restaurant so she could release them into the ocean.
So now we have crates of lobsters everywhere, and I had to get the guests. And myself, we were carrying these squirming lobster monkswits with this gentleman. And you've never seen the face. As you had to walk along the waterfront with a whole crate of lobsters. This very slightly pompous gentleman, never been asked anything like this in his life. Apparently the people in the shop tell this story for years afterwards.
Patricia has shared the last 15 years of her life with Carlo the chimp, and it's all too clear that it is not the end of the road that she fears. What scares her most is that her family will have nobody to love and care for them once she is gone.
What happens when I die? What is going to happen to all my beloved animals? You see, it's a thing that when I went into intensive care about 4 years ago, all I could think about, I mustn't die now, because they're not being, what was going to happen to them, And I was quite determined I wasn't going to die.
5 years ago, Patricia decided to change her will. Husband Frank was written out, and in his stead came Carlo the chimpanzee and the rest of the gang. Cats, dogs, baboons, peacocks, parrots and pigs. She has set up a trust fund to ensure that Broadlands will always be their sanctuary, long after she has gone.
I'm with them every day, you see what I mean? And baboons are not considered that wonderful in South Africa. My horror is that they could all be put down. Because a lot of people consider them vermin. And I bring them up my bed with nappies and every 3-hour feeds, and they're all like my children.
Patricia Cavendish O'Neill is reaching the end of a remarkable journey. The final chapter of her life is being written. It's the story of a little girl who grew up on a farm in Africa, of a young woman watched over by a lioness called Tana, of a gracious soul who leaves a gentle legacy at a place called Broadlands.